Hello, everybody. Good to be back with you. Let's just take a moment and get ourselves present here. And the way that we can do that is bringing our attention to the life of the body. And let's start by, I'm assuming most of you are sitting. If you're not, feel your feet. But bring your attention to your sit bones or bring your attention to your feet. So there's a feeling of dropping in and down in ourselves, in and down. And as we're dropping down and relaxing the eyes, the jaw, let the shoulders drop. Allow the breath to drop. And as we're dropping down in that particular way, we also want to be straight. So we're straightening at the same time. You imagine there's space between your vertebrae. And even our organs are relaxing down. The heart can relax down, the lungs, intestines, the liver, pancreas. Deep in that dark space in between the front and the back. You imagine that you, along with anybody between 8 months and 13 months, when you were an infant and then you stood up, in that moment of steps standing up, the organs drop about 2 inches. And it's not uncommon that through our stress and tensions and living our lives in the marketplace and out in the world and with other people, that we all tighten the organs and bring them up. So when we talk about settling down, think of also your organs. Either feel, sense, or imagine that. I can relax into myself here. Now, together, let's take 3 very deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. We'll do this together. And as we're breathing in, we're straightening. Breathing in, releasing, and relaxing down. Breathing in and settling. Breathing in, feel how the rib cage raises just slightly. And then release. Now again, whether we're sitting or standing, if we're sitting, feel your sit bones and see if you can balance equally between your left sit bone and your right sit bone. If you're standing, feel that balance in your feet. So again, it's not a conceptual cognitive idea, feet left and right, it's a felt sense. And feel if the knees are balanced too. And the hips, your torso. In your head. Now, collectively, let's together take 3 deep breaths again. And this time feel as you breathe that your rib cage will expand out. Thinking this kind of like an unfurling of a scroll, or you're opening a book, or like a clamshell. So taking that deep breath, expanding out horizontally, exhaling, relaxing back into your center line. Taking a deep breath, opening horizontally, releasing, coming back to your center line. Deep breath, expanding out, exhaling, come back to the center line. You still have your length, your bridge between heaven and earth. Your feet are on the ground, but you have a spiritual and moral vision. Length, we're connected to people. We're connected to other life, our plants, the stones, the four-leggeds, the feathered ones, the skies, the waters. And now let's feel our depth. So depth, we always encourage you to start with the back body, bringing your attention to the backs of the legs. And your pelvic bowl, the back of your pelvic bowl. Those long muscles that run parallel to the spine, straight up. The back of the neck, the back of the head. So you can settle back into yourself, settle back and down into yourself, and then navigate your attention from that back body through the inside, and then you're coming out to the front. Let your belly relax. Your heart center relax. The eyes relaxed. And then drop your attention to your center of gravity, to your center, to your hara, tantien. And just touch there. Sometimes it helps just to touch there. Bring your hand there. You feel the sensation of your hand just below the belly button. So you have a dropped open attention. And while you're brought yourself present this way and open and connected, I'd like you to think of a commitment that you have in your life or a declaration about a future possibility. And I want you to say that while you feel your center, as if you're becoming that commitment. You are that commitment. And release your hand. Just check for a moment what mood that created for you. And I'll begin and I'll call everybody's name and you unmute yourself and say what mood that created for you. I feel I'm present and engaged. Nam Pham.
For me, it's expansive and energized.
Thank you. Angie.
Nervous.
Thank you. April. Can you unmute yourself, April? Are you there? No, let's come back. Kim.
Joy and open to possibility.
Mm-hmm. Alicia.
More settled and stable.
Savitha.
Weightless and centered.
Mark.
Sorry, grounded and spacious.
Jess.
Centered and passionate.
Ida.
Centered and focused.
Matt.
Curious.
Rochelle.
Open.
Effie,
Open yet hesitant.
Kim,
Incredibly peaceful.
mm. Claudia, are you there, Claudia? Let's go to Corrine.
I'm sorry. I think I missed what you asked.
We're asking what your mood is.
Oh, relax. Yeah, relax.
Hazel,
Need to settle.
can you say a little bit louder?
Just ready to settle.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah.
Chris Mulvey? Okay, maybe Chris isn't there. Naya?
Arriving.
Thank you. So one of the things we can take away here or use is that we're locating ourselves for some kind of activity or relationship or conversation or way of being. And if we get familiar with this notion of being centered, that it happens more embodied, that is, it's more automatic. And in that we can go, oh, this is my mood right now. So that you might have a talk that you're going to give, and you have all the content in place, but you get yourself present through centering, and you realize like, oh, my mood's off here. My mood's off, so how do I then adjust so I don't actually then transfer anxiety or uneasiness or uncertainty in my talk and get back into center. I'm going to start here by, there was a question that was asked of me by someone that couldn't be on the call. And she was, I think, a yoga teacher, and she was practicing centering the students. There was somebody lying down, and she just continued to let the person lie down. And her question is, can you center lying down? And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. You can center lying down. You can center lying on your side. You can center lying on your stomach. You can center standing up, kneeling, with your knees under you in the Japanese seiza position. And often at this point, if I'm working with a group of people, I would say to everybody freeze where you are. I mean, really right now, just freeze and don't move. And I'm going to ask you to do something, but don't move your body to do it. I want you to center yourself. Don't move your body, but center yourself. Now don't move and don't be centered. Don't be present. Don't be connected. Don't be open. Again, don't move and center yourself. Get yourself present. So the question I would ask everybody is that when you centered yourself without moving, what did you do? That's an internal process that happens. And that process is the process of moving your attention. As we said before, it's a biocybernetic axiom that energy follows attention. So some of you may said, I took a breath, I felt my feet. Beginners may say, oh yeah, I thought about my center. But the essential thing is you're bringing your attention, you're reorganizing your attention. So yes, you can center in all kinds of ways. And if we center in a way in which we become in harmony with gravity, the energy field of the planet, we're mass, we have intent in this mass, we can move our attention in this mass. And it's possible then to move our attention and to reorganize ourselves so we actually become in harmony with gravity. In harmony with gravity, the way that our system is designed and built. So that actually creates more of a presence. So I can have my arms crossed like this, I can be leaning this way, and I can center myself. Those of you that are just listening to this now, what I've done is that I've crossed my arms and kind of tilted to the right. But then if I come and find my vertical line, settle down in myself, feel my width, feel my back, dropping into those dimensions, I create a different presence. So one of the powerful things about learning how to work and coach somatically is you recognize, number one, is that if I change my shape, and we're going to talk more in depth about that now, if I change the shape of my livingness, called my soma or my body, that will change my worldview. I will have a different perception of myself, and I have a different perception of the world. And if I then align myself with these more universal principles of length, width, and depth inside of gravity, how breath works, how our spine works, etc., I create a different assessment among people. They will assess you differently. And in most cases, when they become present that way, they're more of a requirement for the other speaker, for the other person. And I don't mean requirement like burden. I mean requirement like, oh, I want to give this person my attention. They're getting very present for me. They're very direct with me. They're also open-hearted. So I want to be present with them in that specific way. So the answer to that question is yes, you can do that in any number of different ways. This notion of centering. Now, the title of this time we have together is called The Unbounded State. And last time we talked about the arc of somatic transformation, and we came to a place where we call the open space. It's kind of at the top of the arc. And the open space is when the person is inside their learning, is inside of their transformation. And the usual way that they behave, they hold themselves, their breath patterns, their relationship to making contact, the conversations they have begin to shift. We call that the unbounded state, because the boundedness that you had before in your shape is now changing. And to move through this unbounded state is just a critical piece of all transformation. And what it means you're letting go of the old self, and you're opening up to the possibility of a new self, a new world, a new way of looking, a new way of being in the world. And if you study different cultures over different historical times, especially pre-industrialized cultures, you see that there would always be these rituals in which the young woman or the young man would go through some initiation. And by going through this initiation, they would enact of leaving the old self and taking on a new self. You know, in previous days, the Maasai warriors in Kenya and Tanzania, in East Africa, the young men would have to go out and to slay a lion, for example. We know that for many of the Aborigines in Australia have a thing that they call a walkabout, that they will just have maybe a spear, maybe a bow and arrow, a small pouch, and they go out by themselves into the open space, into the nature, into the landscape. And they come back transformed in a particular way. So this notion of the self that you are, as I've said previously, is intimately linked together with your muscular system, your organ system, your nervous system, how you move your attention, and that we can cultivate this dropping away of an old identity, an old way of being, an old personality, and we can take on and live into or embody a new self by working through the body. So I'm going to ask you to do a few things with me. And I'm going to ask you to do a few things with me so that on a scale of 10, you might only do them at a 2 or a 3. If it's hard for you to feel this change at a 2 or 3, you can amplify it up to a 5 or a 7 or an 8. So the first thing I want you to do, and I will also model this. And what it is, I want you to bring your eyebrows up. Lift your eyebrows and hold them up. Now, for some of you, when you do that, you'll also see that there might be creases in the forehead. So this is a particular kind of shape that people can inhabit. Some people, you ask them, what do they, when they become aware of that? This happened to me the other day. I asked a client, did she notice that? She finally noticed that. And I said, what does that mean? She says, well, I'm actually paying attention, or I want you to know that I'm paying attention. So in every shape, there's also a narrative to it, and there's a history to it. So again, stay with me, keep your eyebrows up. Now let your eyebrows drop. So each time you do this, I want you to feel what happens to your breath, what happens to your feeling of aliveness. Is there a lifting or is there a settling? Let's do it one more time. Raise your eyebrows. Maybe your eyes are a little bit more open. Feel what happens to the rest of your body. Relax the eyes, relax the forehead. What essentially happened is we unbounded ourselves then. So there are people that have had either sustained moments of trauma throughout a life period, life phase, or they've had one moment of trauma that was terrifying, being caught in a fire, combat veterans, being perpetrated against sexually, and often the trauma can set in like the eyes will get wider, the forehead will go up, as if the nervous system is caught in kind of a shock. Now, for most of you, it's probably easy to drop this. For many people, it's very difficult even to feel that, and very difficult then to let it go. But the first stage is to feel, where is it that you're holding? Where is it that you're uplifted? Where is it that you're squeezing yourself so that less life or less energy can come through? So by relaxing the forehead, that can be done through the somatic awareness. It can be done through somatic practices of your lifting and releasing. You could even do this with your hand. And it's very powerful to get body work, hands-on body work where you're lying down and somebody is actually working with your breath patterns, touch, gestures, and sounds. This is what we do at Strozzi Institute. We call somatic body work. Here's the next thing I want you to do. I want you to bite down on your teeth, hold that biting down, and just kind of pulse on that biting, but always keep the upper molars and the lower molars together. And that pulsing is actually having the muscles, these masseter muscles here along the jaw start to reflex and release, relax and release. Keep doing that. Notice what happens to your breath. Notice what happens to your mood or emotions or thinking. And now release. Release at the hinge. Release at the chin. And notice what happens when you do that. Doesn't mean the mouth is hanging open, but there's a softening that's happening through here. Now what I want you to do is that I want you to take the tip of your tongue and I want you to press it up against the roof of your mouth. And like I said, you can amplify this like accordion. You can do this on a scale of 1. On a scale of 10, you could do a 1 or a 2, or you could amplify it to an 8. Tip of the tongue is moving to the top of the roof of the mouth. Notice what happens in the throat. Notice what happens in your listening. And now relax that. This one may require a little bit more somatic awareness and sensibility. But what I want you to do is I want you to tighten your throat. You can feel maybe the jaw and chin are pressing down. But you're closing that opening. You're told that you're supposed to be seen but not heard. Maybe because of your gender was told you don't speak out. You're dropping the chin a little bit. If you do this, it's hard to articulate. It's hard to even allow tears and crying to come forward. Now relax that. Maybe even you found yourself doing that, squeezing inside of your legs together, pulling your belly in. Now what I want you to do is that I want you to take these muscles here, right at the, where the arms come in to the front part of the chest, feel that in there. And then I want you to tighten that, like you're drawing your shoulders together and you're closing down your chest. Closing down your chest, closing down your heart, closing down your breath pattern, being smaller. Often women will do this because of the gender oppression and what men are doing with me. I'm closing down my breast. Now release. Just a reminder, as you're doing this with me, I want you also to feel like what images may come up, what conversations or phrases may come up. Now what I want you to do is I want you to bring your breath up just below your collarbone right here. So bring your breath up high, and I want you to be shallow breathing. And I want you to have it be rapid. And then release, drop your shoulders, drop your breath, drop that contraction. Now what I want you to do is come down to your abdomen, and I want you to tighten your abdomen like you're tightening into the center line. You're gripping there. You're not allowing any sensation to move into the pelvis or into your genitals or into your legs. Again, notice what happens to you when that occurs. Now release that. Let your attention drop there. Come down in the pelvic bowl. And that anal sphincter muscle, that tightening, squeeze at the rectum, just tighten. And again, it could be on a scale of 2 to 8 or 9. Feel what else tightens. Feel what occurs, what images show up. Now release. To your upper legs here, I want you to, those muscles on the inside, those are called your adductor muscles. They bring the legs together. Squeeze your legs together. Good, now release. Let's go down to our feet. What I want you to do is that I want you to squeeze your toes in as if you're like, maybe like a bird on a power line or telephone line, and you're holding yourself there. Squeeze your toes, the arches will squeeze, and then release. Those areas, those horizontal areas that I just took you through, a man named Wilhelm Reich, I'm sure you've been studying him or referred by him, Wilhelm Reich, who is a student of Freud's, he began to speak about armoring bands. And these are horizontal bands that go across this whole area here, eyes and forehead. The jaw, the mandibular band, thoracic band, here, the chest, the diaphragm, the pelvis, down into the legs, into the feet. And these bands were created historically so that we would become safe, we would feel safe. We would feel that this brought us into the tribe, into belonging, into connectedness, and that it brought some kind of merit or dignity or value to us. In other words, we modeled those after those that we looked up to or we wanted to be beloved by or joined by, or we did it in response to some kind of threat or some kind of trauma. And like I said, if we do that long enough, this will build neural pathways that these things become more solid or more rigid or more reified. And each of these positions will be a worldview. They will shape how we relate to others, how we relate to the world in itself, what kind of emotions are possible, what kind of emotions aren't possible. As we go through this arc, there becomes a time when we realize something is ending. Maybe the children have left. Maybe you've broken up in a relationship. Maybe your job position has changed. Maybe you're let off from work. Maybe you've been injured. Maybe somebody close to you has died. In other words, that we move often into the unbounded space because something is ending. Something is completing. And inside of that, we have this feeling of being how would you say, it's the feeling of being, I'll use the example that when the child begins to turn away from the family and begins to turn more into the world, there's always a time when that happens, and it's usually around, somatically, it's around the ages of, might be younger now, but let's say 13, 14, 15, maybe even 12, that they have a good enough solid base in the family to begin to turn into the world, or something happens in the family and they realize, oh, I can no longer be here anymore. I can no longer be here anymore because it's not safe. Or I have a longing inside of me and it's not being met here. Or I'm not being seen as having some kind of merit or value from the family system. Some change would occur this way. And inside of that change, we have this possibility of an unbounding or releasing of these bands in a different kind of way. So when this happens, that, as I've said before, it usually has two polarities. There's a lot of zones in between, but the two polarities are, one is that this is exciting. New territory is opening up in front of me. I see somebody that I admire, and I can see as a different kind of model, and I go, oh, that's possible for me to be like that too. How do they do that? How can I do that? Whatever it is that they're doing. How I can become that. And we start to feel other things falling away from us. Maybe those childhood things that we do start to fall away and we begin to experiment with new things and other things. So it's really a feeling of excitation and possibility and a new kind of energy or warmth that's moving through us. Now, the other thing that can happen, and this is like on an extreme, the other thing that can happen here is that in feeling like I'm moving into deeper waters, that it's kind of terrifying. And I'm not sure how I can act anymore or how I should be anymore. And the essential question that comes up is, who am I now? And that question takes us back to the somatic principle of the deep, intimate connection between the self, our own self-knowing, and the body. The body is tissues, the body is energy, the body is life, the body is cooling down, is warming up, etc., etc. And that is a moment of probably of like terror, that I'm really not sure now. Terror, and I'm really not sure, or how any of this, I can actually move through this in some new way. In other words, our previous identity is starting to unravel. And while this in some way can happen numerous times during the day, where we are letting go of something and something new happens. We step off on the curb, we almost get hit by a car. And there's a moment of all of ourselves get unraveled and the world looks brand new. There's a whole new energy moving through me. And then I reconstitute myself. I reorganize myself into this new body. So those are the polarities of entering the unbounded state. And as a somatic therapist, a somatic coach, mind-body practitioner, yoga teacher, is that this is a place that is really the art of the art. This is the place where you can really help shepherd or midwife or guide a person through that space. And the only way to really do that with any kind of integrity is to recognize that is to recognize that you've done this yourself. You know the territory. And the way that you're presencing yourself with a client is in the presencing of, I understand this. I understand that this has happened to you, and that it is happening to you, and is both exciting and terrifying. And what I will do is that I will partner with you and I'll ally with you as you move through this. We'll, in conversations, in practices, and in pace and in speed. And a powerful example of it is like, this is the moment where the ship has been loaded, and now the ship is taking off from that port and is now moving towards this other place that we might have a vision of, or we've heard of, we've seen somebody model it, but we recognize that if we don't really engage ourselves, it will just be an idea. It'll just be a hope. It'll be just a New Year's resolution instead of something that we actually become, that we actually enter that other shore. This is like the metaphor of the cup and the quart. You're holding in your hand a cup, and this cup is how much love, accountability, commitment, effectiveness, skill, power that you can manage. You see, there's possible to have more. There's a quart. There's a possibility of another human being who's living, and you go, wow, they have much more width and much more depth, and they have much more length in themselves, in more dignity and more possibility, and in many ways, a much, much bigger, richer life. And the way that they navigate that is just exceptional. That's the quart. So we put down the cup, and then we reach towards the quart. And this transition here requires a number of things to pay attention to. And how do we actually navigate or shepherd ourselves or others through this? And that's because, you know, our educational institutions have failed us here. And this really isn't taught in many of our religious or spiritual conversations either. And in somatics, we can say this is a place that we have to come to a reckoning with. Are the practices that I've been doing, will they be the same practices that will take me to where I'm going? Those are all the way simple things like this. The practice, I have a certain kind of breath pattern. The practice of how I'm holding my shoulders. The practice of how I'm letting my weight go down to the earth. To the practices that I have speaking to my intimates or strangers. The practices I've had about making contact, pushing contact away, over merging with people. Well, the practices that you're doing now, are they going to be useful taking you to this new place? Do you have somebody, a very good friend, a guide, a coach, a teacher, a mentor, who's been through this and is very literate in it, and they can actually help guide you through it? You'll be making your choices. You'll have agency. It'll be you authoring this, but they can say, you know, you're going a little bit too to the right. Or, you know, when you get into this kind of problematic area where there's a little bit of a gravelly part of the road, you'll drop your head down and make yourself smaller. Practice bringing your head up even through that time. So you have your practices, you have a guide that takes you through. And also, it's very powerful to be in a group, a community, a collective of fellow practitioners. Because if you're in a group of people doing collective practices together. And there's a moment where we start to reflect on those practices, what they're happening, what's coming up. Inevitably, if people are frank and transparent and integrity, this will occur. And if the leader or leaders of a group like that are transparent, they will begin to shape the ethic of the group conversation so those things can occur. What you'll see in that is that you won't be alone. You're actually not doing this alone. It can be an individual transformation that others are going through. It can be a group, collective, tribe that's going through that. It can be your team at work. It can be a company. And I would go as far to say that it can also be a nation going through this transition. And what I would say is that America is going through that transition now. And it's being asked to wake up to things that it has long anesthetized ourselves to. So those are really the markers for helping us move through this unbounded state. I'm going to turn on my light here. I'll be right back. What I want to do now is I want to read you a poem. And Mika, if you write this down, it's called "Missing the Boat," and it's by a Palestinian poet named Naomi Shihab Nye, N-Y-E, Shihab, S-H-I-H-A-B hyphen Nye, N-Y-E. And the title is "Missing the Boat." And I want you to listen to this poem exactly in terms of what we've been talking about. That all of a sudden something begins to move away, there's some change, and we start to move into this uncharted waters. It is not so much that the boat passed and you failed to notice it. It is more like the boat stopping directly outside your bedroom window, the captain blowing the signal horn, the band playing a rousing march. The boat shouted, waving bright flags, its silver hull blinding in the sunlight. But you had this idea you were going by train. You kept checking the timetable, digging for tracks, and the boat got tired of you. So tired, it pulled up the anchor and raised the ramp. The boat bobbed into the distance, shrinking like a toy, at which point you probably realized you had always loved the sea. Missing the Boat by Naomi Shihab Nye. So I read that poem because one of the things in my deconstruction of it, one of the things that the poet is asking us to do is to see what's in front of us, to see actually what isn't happening to everybody. In other words, that the thing that we often lose sight of is really what is most present, because we're in a story about how things should be, how I want it to be, or places I don't like myself, I want this to leave. And we really want to start in going, what is it? What is happening right now, right in this moment? And that takes a certain kind of rigor to do that. And it also takes a certain kind of responsiveness to a longing or an urge towards this becoming that we are, towards this evolutionary being that we are. And one of the ways to do that, I would suggest, there's a number of ways to do that, of course. One of the ways to do that is basically just to feel your body. And feel your body, as we said before, the temperature, the movement in the body, the shapes that happen, what's being held or turned into a knot or contracted, what's opening, what's pooling, what's trembling, et cetera, et cetera. So let me stop right there. Let me stop right there in what we're speaking about and ask if you have any questions. And the questions can also be tied to any other parts of the arc or anything else that we've done ourselves. Anything else that we've done before. Or it could be if you would like to work on something and we have kind of a mini somatic coaching event.
Can I ask a question? Therese?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me? It's Therese.
Yes, who is this?
Therese,
Therese, yes, please, go ahead.
my question, when you were going through the various bands,
Yes.
my experience around some of them was actually quite frightening. It was bringing up a lot of trauma. I know what it's about because it's things that I am working with someone and doing body work to release. So my question is that part of the practice and the coaching practice that obviously the whole idea is as you go through it, you would be noticing what comes up. So I guess the first question is, as you do the practices, does that help to release? Or is it, yeah, I'm sorry, my question doesn't make a lot of sense. But yes, how is the practices itself part of the healing and the releasing, and can you use it in that way?
Absolutely. Yes. The answer to that is an unequivocal yes. And that's part of the methodology. And this notion of going through those bands and things releasing is not an uncommon experience, where there may be an image from the past, a sensation from the past, or something that arises up and through you. And this is not a practice of re-traumatizing. This is a practice of releasing those bands and really just seeing what's there. And a seasoned, experienced practitioner then can work with, you use the word trauma, work with the trauma that has been there, or work with the shaping that has happened, not necessarily through trauma, although if we think of trauma as those moments where we are disconnected from the present moment, as a basic, simple definition, but other places where we go, oh, if I shape myself this way, this is how I will be loved. If I shape myself this way, this is how I'll be accepted. And once those things begin to dissolve, and it's a feeling of dissolving, things will rise up and can be worked with.
Fantastic, thank you.
Does that answer your question, Teresa?
Absolutely does. And just the comment I can make around that, having worked with this a bit, and being a bit a fan of what's his name, The Body Keeps the Score. So just looking at how they're working with trauma in the body is how the lived experience that I've had of how talk therapy, talking through things, all the things, even mindfulness practice and that can just keep all of that in some sort of an intellectual mental pattern, but then that incredible power of when it releases in the body. And you can't explain that. It's not something that you really make work or something. It happens and you know when it happens. But obviously the practices primes that release. But yeah, it's an amazing lived experience. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Richard, we have a question from Effie and then Matt.
Okay, Effie, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi. So all of this is just like really resonating for me because more so I feel like I'm going through this transition myself in this phase and point in time of my life. And I'm 28. I'll be 29 in January, and I'm looking at this work as something that I eventually would like to do in guiding people through. I've spoken to you kind of about my vision in terms of using movement as a form of healing trauma. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
yeah. And so, you know, I guess this is like, you know, the healer's journey. You have to go through your own healing to really be able to understand where the people you're working with are going through. But I guess I'm feeling like, how many of these transitions and phases, because now I'm just kind of feeling like really young, or maybe I don't have enough experience because I'm just currently going through it all right now, and I'm feeling like this new space in my life where I'm really being challenged and just having to let go and just trust and go with the flow and not resist and not close off and stay open. And so all of this that you're saying is resonating. I'm just kind of wondering, like, at what point, is it an age thing? Is it like when will I know if I am like, when can I finally begin to hold the space for someone else and guide them through it?
Well, one of the ways is go through a program of study, a path of awakening, a discourse that has certain kinds of standards. And then as you go through that, and it has its weight, what it will teach you will be this: there's a way to perceive in this discourse. There's a worldview and a way to perceive bodies, individuals, collectives, growing, transforming. It'll teach you certain kind of moves that you can make, certain kind of conversations that you can have that will allow people to go deeper and become more embodied. And those are all the way from, you know, like in our discourse at Strozzi, it's like you'll learn how to touch people, working with the tissues. You'll learn how to do breath patterns with people. You'll learn how to certain gestures will bring forward things, certain kind of sounds like that will happen, and certain movements that you do. Those are almost countless. And number three, what you'll learn is that there's a certain presence or self that you have to have cultivated that produces trust in others, produces a motivation for them to want to be with you and work with you and to go forward. So once that happens and you go through that line of study, then your teachers, and if you've given them the authority to make this choice, say, yes, you've done it. You're there. And it doesn't mean that you just go off. You might start by doing it with supervised work. Teachers can still support you, but that's really one of the ways that happens. There's very formal ways. You know, you go to university, and at some level in university, you get out and you go, oh, I passed the law exam. But in this kind of work, find a good school, find a good institute that can help you develop all those things, set a criterion for success, and say, you've done that, good job. That's one way.
Got it.
One of the ways it happened for me is that when I did these things, I went through I apprenticed with a number of people, and they were extraordinarily generous with me. They weren't necessarily easy with me or easy people, but they were very generous with me, and they were bringing me up just like that. And then at some point saying, they kicking me out of the nest. Now you have to go and do this. That's another way it's happened. Is that useful, Effie?
Yeah. Yeah, it's what I suspected to a certain degree. I know that I'm in my journey, and a part of that is also going to just be needing to like community, acquiring skills, and finding a mentor as I go through my experience, and making that richer so that I can then be able to have a base to direct others through.
Yes, great. Matt, you had a question?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
So there's a reference in your chapter on the somatic arc of transformation. I just wanted to read this, but there's something that really hit me strong. You said the first path on a somatic path of transformation is the moment at which we see a new possibility, something ending. You've talked about this. Meeting a remarkable person or the introduction to a new community appears as a new possibility. This also initiates the ending of a particular segment of our life. Our journey is marked by the process of disassembling a way of being that is no longer useful. It's a period of letting go, of molting our historical shape. So we know that loss of all sorts of types, financial, romantic, or whatever, can start that process. I sold pretty much everything that I owned at the end of 2017, and I moved down to Mexico. And what was really fascinating is from the view down there, I saw the self-absorption of our society, but more important, the self-importance. And this separation between people was really acute. It made me think of, perhaps you're familiar with Martin Buber's book, I and Thou. And we have such a limited vision, it seems, of other people. And you also mentioned rites of passage. And whether it's the walkabout or whatever, we don't seem to have these in Western society. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Richard Rohr, the Franciscan monk, and he says, you know, this, especially for men, this winds up as being father hunger. There's a lot of dissociation between men. So I do have a question. I just wanted to preface it with that. You mentioned being with a client as an ally. And so it's kind of a two-part question. Do you recommend, when you're working with clients, if they have missed out on these rites of passage, do you recommend that they undergo those? I actually found you through the book Presence, and they mention the full title, I'm sure you know it, Presence, Human Purpose in the Field of the Future, which was amazing. And it discusses the importance of a vision quest. The second question is, and this is actually a bigger one for me and the one that I really want to focus my work on, how do you guide a client outside of their self-absorption and self-importance so they can see a greater world around them of service and sacrifice? And that's my question.
Thank you. I want to go back a little bit. You said that you were first introduced to my work through this book. Is that right? Presence?
Yeah, there was a reference in there. I don't know what it is specifically, but I know there was a mention of Strozzi in there somewhere. I'm not sure exactly who or what. I can find it if you'd like.
No, it's fine. I realize I'm not familiar with it, but I'm just curious. Yes, with clients, I believe there are places, and this is kind of the art of it, where they might say, what would you say is a good practice to do, or what would you say would be good for me? And for many people, this whole notion of going on some kind of a vision quest, what we call a vision quest, with really a strong, integrous people, can be very, very hopeful, can be very, very useful for people. So my answer to that is yes. And maybe not for everybody, but how about you thinking about this piece or going with these groups? And that requires you have some kind of a, people that that you can refer to. We used to call it Rolodex. I don't know what they call it now on our virtual lives, but you have a list of people you can refer them to. And one segment would be, yes, these people do this work, or they'll take you, their experience, they've done it for a while, they have ground, they're in a tradition, and they can take you out and do a vision quest, or a contemporary modern vision quest. So the answer to that is yes. Guiding somebody out of this notion of self-importance, I think that the answer I'm going to give to that is really an answer I think we can give to a lot of things where you could substitute something else for self-importance. But what I've seen is that people will shift or change or open up to something for two ways. One is there's a breakdown in their life. There's something that's not working. Somebody left me in relationship. I'm not successful at work. My health is failing. I've lost my purpose. There's some kind of breakdown. And often for a reflective thinking person, that breakdown will touch something inside of them we can call a longing or an urge or a yearning for something. So with that background, Matt, I think one of the things that a strong coach, mentor, guide, teacher, therapist can do is help them see the breakdown. So a lot of people aren't even aware of the breakdown that's happening. So a person could come to you for one reason. What you see is this sense of self-aggrandizement or self-importance or exceptionalism that they keep reinforcing about themselves is actually creating the dilemmas or the conundrums or the problems that they have in their life. It's the example of like somebody may come in to the chiropractor, osteopath, or body worker and going, my knee continues to bother me. But what they don't see, it actually originates in the hip. So you can work on the knee forever, and for a week it's good, then it goes back because the real core contraction, what in semantics we call the core contraction, the core self-importance, the core privilege, the core that I'm at the center of the universe is the thing that you actually have to deal with. So it's how do you create that opening or the breakdown or the view that is where their misalignment, liability, suffering is being created. What do you think about that?
I like that. Thank you. If a quick follow-up question, if they don't see this, because one thing I've noticed recently as I've explored embodiment, and I tend to see things or have an insider. I'm a pretty perceptive guy, and so I often will see something that's going on with somebody that they might not see themselves. How do you point this out to them in a way where they can hear it and don't feel like they are being lectured? Or do you understand my question?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I think it's a great point, and it's a great question because it points to something that I think is really fundamental for those of us in the helping professions, unquote. And one of the ways to do that is that you're listening. Let's say you're in the conversational space, and you can see that something goes through their energy field, or something happens in their body in a certain kind of a way, and you might say, "Oh, what was that?" or "What happened there?" They could go all the way from "I don't know, I didn't notice anything" to they could say that what happened, and you could say, well, if they say to you, "Why do you say that?" and you could say, "Well, I noticed at that time your eyes kind of squinted and they darted back and forth, left and right, and you closed your jaw down and your breath lifted up. Did you notice that? For most people, being in an disembodied culture won't notice that. And the first thing that does is that helps reveal a world to them that wasn't yet revealed. The second thing that happens is that in the revealing of that world, we can lead them into seeing that saying something. So you could say then, for example, so I noticed those are just observations, but can I tell you how it actually affected me? And inside of this, you might say it this way: it produced the assessment. So an observation, my head's forward, my eyebrows are up, I'm in shock, is an observation, but it produces an assessment. And you can see it produces an assessment that all of a sudden you broke contact with me. And I speculated maybe you had some kind of questioning about my perception, so there was a moment of trust. I'm making this stuff up now. That would be a way to begin to open up to them, to begin to observe. Maybe there's ways that they're being that they're blind to. And this is you as an outside observer, it's easier for you to see those things at this stage and then reflect them back, have them reflect it about it. And then usually there'll be a pattern and you can say, oh, you see, it's happening again here. What just happened? Your thoughts?
I think that is a skill that I would do well to perfect, because sometimes I'm a little bit too direct in my assessments. So thank you very much. I'll turn it over to somebody else. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I also want to say there's definitely times where it's necessary to be direct with our assessments. I think that as long as we lay down a ground of trust and they've granting us that trust, that we can do that. Also, it's important to remember that, and we can even pass this on to our clients, that our nervous system is self-referring. In other words, we see inside of our own stories. We see inside of our own stories. We see inside of our own belief systems. And it's only a trained attention or a trained mind, body, spirit process that's able to observe ourselves, because otherwise we're just doing what we're doing. It's one of the reasons that people that have been physically anything by their parents, what their parents have done to them, they'll often pass on to their children, because they say, no, this is what I learned and it got me here, so I'm going to pass it. I'm going to do that to my kids. And they can't see outside of that story and those behaviors and the harm that they're creating. So, yeah, and that we are all in our process of awakening in some place in which we're probably blind to something, and to have a competent, trained person that we respect outside of ourselves to give us those assessments and to give us those observations is just a great, great gift. Anything else here? Okay, let me tell you a story about this thing of an opening. And I was asked back in the 80s, I was approached by the Army Special Forces if they could do, if I could put together a project with other people that produced a mind-body soldier. And in other words, I think it came a lot because of what had happened. It was about 10 years after Vietnam, still healing from all of that particular mess. And, a holistic soldier, they said, can you build a holistic soldier? Long interviews with them, like what that meant and what they meant by that. And they said, well, it means that there's physical enhancements, mental enhancements, and team cohesion. Pretty broad, but said, okay. And then we had these 2 Green Beret A teams under operational command for almost 7 months. We did intense meditation. We did Aikido every day. We did body work. We redesigned their physical fitness program. Redesigned their diet, worked with their families, their systems that they were in. And in all elements, how they healed themselves, all elements, they really did tremendously well. And by the way, that I kept a journal. I always keep journals. And it was a classified project, but at a certain point that was declassified in the late 80s and early 90s. And a publisher said, you want to publish your journal? And I said, sure. And it's called In Search of the Warrior Spirit. And actually is in the 4th edition of continuing to work with what I would call the warrior, in search of the warrior spirit, what that means. And I also want you to know is that I'm really a very strong advocate for peace. I'm an anti-peace person. I was in the military. I've been in war zones, a number of them, and it's just old-fashioned and something that I am committed and dedicated to change as much as I can. So with that background, we're at a meditation retreat. We're sitting and doing a walking, sitting meditation for about 13, 14 hours a day. We've disrupted their chain of command. And at the end, I always try to get to the sittings earlier because they're unused to this. And then I would sit as long as everybody else was sitting, they'd leave. The sittings would be about an hour long, then a walking meditation of 30 minutes and sitting of an hour. At the end of one of these sittings, I saw the sergeant of one of these teams. He's called the top sergeant. He's moving his neck around and kind of rubbing it with his hand. And I went over to him. I said, hey, what's up, Top? And he says, oh, nothing. Really a macho, very macho crew. And I said, what's up? He says, nothing. He says, it looks like your neck's bothering you. He says, yeah. But, not wanting to show any weakness at all. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, it was in a parachute accident. And I said, oh, when was this? And he said, about 15 years ago. I said, wow, you still have it? And he said, yeah. I said, have you ever been to a chiropractor? He said, no. So he said, what's that? What's a chiropractor? So I said, let me show you some. So I'm trained in adjustments, doing some kinds of adjustments. He lays down, a little bit kind of suspicious. There's 2 other soldiers in there, and it's very homophobic, and they're going, oh, you're going to touch him? What's that? We're going to stay here and make sure everything's okay. And I can feel in his neck that one of the cervical vertebrae has been subluxated. In other words, it's out a little bit. So I soften the tissues, and then I adjust his neck. There's kind of a big pop in the room, pop. And the other 2 or the 3 that are standing there kind of look at me like I'm a shaman or something. And so the top sergeant gets up and he's moving his neck and he goes, he's from West Virginia. He's been in a lot of really hard situations. I want to give that background on him. He was a prisoner of war for a while in Vietnam. And he says, wow, that feels good. My neck really feels good now. He says, thank you. And he goes off, we're in this wooded encampment. He goes off in the woods. And so as he goes off into the woods, that way he's kind of whistling to himself. And I just had something I thought I should look in the chat room. I'm back with you now. Is that inside of that, I see him the next morning, and we're in a tent where we have our we have our meals, and inside of that, I look and he's in the corner of the tent, and he's usually a social guy, and he sees me, he kind of nods me to come over like that. And I come over and I said, "Hey, Todd, what's happening?" And he says, he looks at me, he looks suspiciously around, which is very unlike his social way of being. And he says to me, "I woke up on my left side this morning," kind of an accusatory tone. And I say to him, "Well, you have to give me a little bit more than that. What, so what?" And he said, "I haven't slept on my left side in 15 years. He's looking me straight in the eyes. This is a guy whose skin's kind of white now. He's looking around paranoid. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes to me in the most tenderest of ways. He says, "Am I okay?" In other words, because of his neck, he couldn't move himself in a certain way. He couldn't sleep or take certain postures in a certain way. And what that did, it threw him into this unbounded state. And here's this kind of hardened soldier, Green Beret type, and he goes, "Am I okay? Am I okay?" And it was just a very powerful moment for me to recognize that this being thrown into this unbounded state could happen in all kinds of ways. I also wanted to tell it to you as a way of something that I thought was so simple. Like that night I went back to my team, we debriefed the day. One of the debriefs is I saw the top sergeant, his neck was out. I did the adjustment, he was fine. And that was it. But for him, it was life-changing. And it was life-changing, even bigger in that moment of going, "Am I okay?" But his life towards his job, his family, his children really changed incredibly because he saw that he could transform himself and still be the kind of person that he wanted to be. So that's that story. And those things can happen in all kinds of ways. Yeah. So there's a question in here that's from Claudia, and I'm going to answer it because I think it's important, is that in individual sessions or group sessions, how do we use our bodies as sources of information? Now, I think I touched on this, but let me just go back. And Claudia, I want you to weigh in on this when I'm finished. That's the place where you can see the person, which is there in some conversation, there's something that comes up that they're very tender around or hurt around or afraid of. And you can see that their skin color changes. Their face become red. You can see their breath rises up. Maybe pretty soon their chins start to shake in this kind of a way. And you notice that they're in some kind of a transition. And often, and this happens, that a person might be embodying the history of, I'm not sure, if I start to cry here, that means that I'm weakness. And what might happen here is that, so I'm stopping myself from crying. What you do is you ask the person what's happening. If they say nothing, say, well, I asked the question because I can see the chin is shaking. I can see that you're breathing in a different way, and there's wetness in your eyes. And then you can go into an educational mode in saying, the way that I work is that I know our bodies are always informing us of something. And that's a part of you that's coming to the foreground now. And this is how he or she, how they're showing up. And so inside of that, that's the way that you start to show people that it's not a disembodied mind that you have, but it's a shape that carries your perceptions, your thoughts, your sensations, your feelings, your emotions, your moods, your ways of acting in the world. And that history will come up and inform you of what's occurring. The other history you may have is your shoulders go up, you're afraid, but you're not supposed to be afraid, so you never say that. But your body is saying, I'm protecting myself. Why do we protect ourselves? Well, we feel like there's a threat or something untoward may happen. I'm afraid. And that's the way you begin to show the other that the body is a source. It's actually an encyclopedia of this great information. Claudia, did that help?
It did. I actually was talking about when I am a coach and my own body is talking to me while the other person is talking. So now you're making me think, is my own body talking about my own history? But when I am in a group or if I'm coaching somebody, and if they say something that feels particularly resonant, my body might like get flushed with zings, or especially in a group setting, my body will talk to me. And so then I'm interpreting it, and I just am wondering, does that happen to you? And, I guess how often you might use your own body as a source of information for what might be happening in a group or between you and a coachee. I get the looking at the other person's body. I get what you're talking about.
I gotcha. Let me answer it this way and say if we're on the same page here. Is that yes, my body being with a group or being with others, I listen very closely to my body, very closely. And if something happens to another person, I might feel a flush in a warmth and an extension towards the other that I recognize as empathy. And by recognizing that little portal of empathy, then I can say, oh, now let me have empathy with that. The place where they may, I find myself leaning forward with them, I may then recognize, oh, what they're doing is they're actually leaving the central piece of their work and going off on a digression. And I'm out there trying to chase after it. I come back into my own body, check that out, and say, are we actually in the conversation that's most important now? So yes, I do feel all those things in that way. And when it comes to places like really a deep sense of empathy, it's really important to recognize that I have that empathy, I have that compassion, but the experience they're having is their experience. So I don't overmerge with them. I don't collapse inside of them. I don't, while I may feel or have a sense of the sensations and feelings they're having, I will make very clear that's them and this is me. In the way that I do it, I might feel my sit bones in the chair, might feel my breath, and as I'm doing that, say, oh yes, that's them, and I'm having empathy with them now, but that's their experience, not my experience. I think those were the two questions.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else before we go on here? So we're in this unbounded state. The client's in this unbounded state, or we're in this unbounded state. And these are the things that we could pay attention to so that we allow the body, the soma, we allow the person to move through this state so that they actually are gathering a deeper sense of wisdom, a deeper sense of intelligence, a deeper sense of empathy and compassion, and being skillful in action. So there could be a time when somebody is going through this and they recognize as they're changing that they're leaving things behind. There's actually loss, because the way I related to this person, I'm relating different. And I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. Maybe this is the person that I always had the afternoon cocktail with, and I'm not doing that anymore. So there's a sense of, am I going to lose the relationship? So generally speaking, there's a sense of grief as we're moving into a new way of being, moving into a new identity, a new self. And when you notice that as a therapist, coach, guide, mentor, it's really important that you honor that it's not like, okay, let's keep moving through this. We're going, oh, grief is present now, and grief wants to come up, and grief is a way, our body will tell us, grief is a way that we're able to begin to express loss, the fear of loss, the tension of loss, the grief of loss. And that it's also a way in which grief can help integrate that feeling of loss so that we can continue to move forward in the most grounded, centered, contactful, and loving, fulfilling way as possible. So we're looking at that in a way in which that it can be very common that will happen that way. Also, that people can feel sentimental. They will actually do things to inhibit themselves by going through this place from the cup, from the court, from the old shape, from the old self to a new shape, and to a new self, to really become this new vision of themselves. They can become like overly sentimental. They might become overly medicated. They may be medicating themselves then. They may become harder and rigid. They may become more, well, depressed even some level of depression that slows the process down and not going at the pace in which the organism can actually go. And inside that, those are markers to go, oh, they're in unbounded space, and there's some kind of fear about it. There's some kind of not sureness of it, and it's being acted out by sentimentality about the past, who I was. It could be like, I'm just going to grip onto that and be that, because that I'm not, I'm going to be somebody else that's not there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that we begin to attend to those things, and because they're present with us, we actually join with them. You don't want to go skip over it, don't do that. You want to go, what tells you in your body that you're hanging on to the past? What tells you bodily that you now want something, you want that cigarette, you want that drink, you want that joint, you want that medication, not to feel as much? What is that like? That becomes part of the work. Now, on the other side of that, what we want to look at is the place in which the person's in there and they might get a glimpse, the first glimpse of the new shape, of the new self. You start to say things that you are just surprising to yourself. People give you feedback about how you're changing. You might change your diet. You might change your pattern of exercising. You're starting to take up new things that going, oh, I am changing. And in that case, often the other extreme happens where the person puts their foot on the accelerator and wants to go faster. How can I then move through this open, unbounded space, this great protoplasmic ocean that has so many new sensations and so many new ideas and so many different kinds of moods that occur? How do I move through all of that? And in moving through all of that, I'll get through it and be in this new vision of myself. Because here, what we say is that the body knows its rhythm. Will the history come up and try to speed you up, try to hold you back? Yeah, absolutely. But if we really go down into the depth and we touch these 2.5 billion years of evolution that holds tremendous intelligence and intelligence wisdom, as we begin to touch that in this open, unbounded space, this great ocean that is sometimes calm, sometimes windy, sometimes roiling around. There's no signpost, but if we listen deeply to it, we'll say, oh, this is my life energy moving me towards my next evolution. That we want to then go listen to the body in that sense of like, what is the pace of that? And I'm not trying to stop it, slow it down, code it over with self-medication. I'm not trying to hurry it up, jump over something, get there quicker before something else happens. But what's really at the bottom of that? And that's another place that we need to look at. And then to go, let's just slow that down. Let's slow that down. Let's form the body as a container. And the body contains so much of this right now. And let's just work with where we are right now. You're in this practice. How can that practice deepen? All of a sudden, you're telling somebody much more intimate things about yourself. Are you giving yourself enough time to integrate that? Are you giving enough time that you can set down roots around that that'll make you grow in a way that'll be more fulfilling towards you? So those are the places we want to look at, that there can be a movement one way or the other that will start to move those things in the wrong direction. By move those things, I mean move this passageway, this navigation that we're moving through. How do we notice those things for ourselves? We feel them in our body. We feel them in our body. Maybe all of a sudden I'm getting really sleepy around things. I'm getting really tired. Nothing else has changed except this. Is that a way to numb myself? Am I anesthetizing myself? Or am I whipping myself up into some kind of excitation that is really false and ingenuous, and I'm skipping over things, skipping over steps in this path of growing? So again, let me just stop there for a moment and ask you, do you have any questions? And I'm going to get up and turn on an outside light. Any questions you have, comments, learning, even a mini coaching piece?
I have a question, if I may, Richard.
Who is this?
Therese. Therese?
Therese again. Yes, hello, Therese.
Hi again. What I got from what you just said is, and in a lot of this is our job is when we're working with someone and in ourselves, to bring it back to the body, what we are feeling in the body. And what our, we are almost midwives of that process of someone coming out of self-learning and all those things you talk about in your book. The question that came up for me was the difference really between counseling, traditional coaching, somatic coaching. Because in counseling, and I think sometimes the tempting part could be that we start, because we're conditioned that way, that we think that it is through telling our story that we heal, and that's what you would do in a counseling situation. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on that and perhaps just elaborate in those differences and some of the signposts and warning signs for us as practitioners in how to handle that.
Do me a favor here, Claudia, and tell me again, what is the that that we're reflecting on now?
Do you mean the sorry, what I mean by that?
What you said is, you said, can you throw, my paraphrase, can you throw some light on that?
On that, yes.
And I just want to clarify what you mean by the.
So the difference in approach between counseling, psychology, traditional coaching, somatic coaching, and that really being the sense of focus and what we bring the client back to, as opposed to getting lost or going down in the stories of what led to what you would do in counseling. Any more sense?
Yes. Yeah, I think I understand you. Thank you for that. You know, in somatic coaching, one of the things that it showed up for me in becoming a psychologist, having therapy, doing therapy, is that psychology could take me to a portal. It could take me to a portal where I would have insight, I would have awareness. I saw that with other people too, but it didn't move me into new actions. It didn't move me into new behaviors. Did I understand myself? Yes. Is that important? Yes. Did I understand the history of myself? Yeah, that has importance too. But I wasn't shown, or I wasn't shown the pathway about what does it mean to take new actions. So that we would say learning really is you're able to take actions that you were previously unavailable to you. An action could be even how you're in a different mood, or how you're letting your emotions move freely, or how you react when somebody criticizes you, for example. Like I had what I called in my book, The Anatomy of Change, I had a lot of awareness badges. I was aware of this, I was aware of this, I was aware of how my mother shaped me, my father, and et cetera, but at the end of the day, I was really had a longing that I could be a different actor in the world. And so inside of that, I would say what I've learned is that the body is a direct connection, to our urge, our yearning, our longing, our desire, however you say that, to live a more whole, fulfilling, satisfying life. And inside of that, you might say, oh, I'm happier, I'm more connected, I feel more useful and have more merit. But the ground of that, from my point of view, will be expressed through the physical form. So in that way, we are our bodies and we're also more than our bodies. And we don't have bodies, we are bodies. We don't have language, we are language. And in that way, that's the place in which we start to see ourselves as a wholeness. And it also looks at us as not like broken, but we may have wounds. We're not necessarily broken and following that line down the psychological path in that way. So if I think that I might be answering your question, Claudia, I would say the place in which we move towards, we bring ourselves from our story and going, is the story that I'm telling here out of my mouth? For those of you who are listening to this, I'm pointing my fingers to my mouth, out of my mouth. It is my body saying the same story. Some people will tell their story, and as you're learning to read bodies and shapes, you realize, boy, their body hasn't caught up with this story, or the story hasn't caught up with the body. In other words, people can be acting confidently, genuinely confidently. They can be acting in a centered way. They can be acting skillfully, but they have a story about themselves that is not that I don't have worth, I'm unworthy, I'm unable to do these kinds of things, and there's a split. So the body is actually entered into that phase, and the story about themselves is behind. That's the place where the coach or the therapist can reflect back that, can I tell you my experience of you? This is not putting on a happy face, this is not blowing smoke, but it's saying, you show up to me in these kinds of ways. And here's my grounding for that. And then the grounding comes from the behaviors you've seen, the tone of their voice, what happens when they're talking about a difficult situation, et cetera, et cetera.
That's excellent. Thanks, Richard. And I think behind that is often how we can, as you said, have great understanding, awareness, all of that, but still feel stuck in our life and old patterns. So thank you. That's really helpful.
Good, good.
Richard, we had one question from Claudia. She asked, so are you saying that unboundedness is necessary to growth?
I do. Yes. To move through that unbounded state where we're shedding, we're letting go of habits that no longer serve us in ways that no longer are useful for us. That in that shedding, it's a requirement to go through the opening, what we call somatic opening. I said that last time, and inside the somatic opening, we experience that as an unbounded state. I'm not bounded by my history as much now. Yes, so the answer is yes. I'm going to read, as we're coming into the home stretch here, I'm going to read another poem to you. Why do I read poems? Why do I read poetry? One of it is that when I was an undergraduate in literature, English, and I had an English teacher that said that poetry will save the world. Now I'm like 20 or something like that, 21. And he was the guy who was in World War II, like many of that generation, and he was decorated as a hero. So there was something in my looking in which poetry and the profound warrior ethic didn't belong together. So I had some respect for him, but I couldn't tell what it was. But he captured me enough because of that, that I began a journey of looking at poetry, reading poetry, writing poetry that's been there ever since. And also T.S. Eliot, English poet, he said, poetry is a raid on the inarticulate. Poetry is a raid on the inarticulate. That which lives in our unconscious can then be revealed through poetry. Octavio Paz, the Latin American essayist and poet, said that it's poetry gives us the opportunity to go into the deep waters of our existence. Carlos Williams said, people, you don't get the daily news from poetry. You don't get the daily news from poetry, but people die from the lack of it every day. So that's what has me looking at poetry. This is called, even the word obstacle is an obstacle. And the first obstacle is in italics. Even the word obstacle is an obstacle. This is by Alison Luterman. So because her last name, Luterman. Alison is Alison. She's a Bay Area poet. She's up here. She says, try to love everything that gets in your way. Try to love everything that gets in your way. The Chinese women in flowered bathing caps murmuring together in Mandarin and doing leg exercises in your lane while you execute 36 furious laps, one for every item on your to-do list. The heavy-bellied man who goes thrashing through the water like a horse with a harpoon stick in its side and whose breathless tsunamis rock you from your course. Teachers all, learn to be small and swim past obstacles like a minnow without grudge or memory. Dart towards your goal, sperm to egg. Thinking obstacle is another obstacle. Thinking obstacle is just another obstacle. Try to love the teenage girl lounging against the ladder, showing off her new tattoo. Say, vie es la mienne, this life is mine, in thick blue-black letters on her ivory instep. Be glad she'll have that to look at the rest of her life, and keep going, and keep going. Swim by an uncle in the lane next to yours who is teaching his nephew how to hold his breath underwater, even though kids aren't supposed to be in the pool at this hour. Someday, years from now, this boy who is kicking and flailing in the exact place you want to touch and turn may be a young man at a wedding on a boat, raising his champagne glass in a toast when a huge wave hits, washing everyone overboard. He'll come up coughing and spitting like he is now, but he'll come up like a cork, alive. So, your moment of impatience must now bow in service to the larger story. So your moment of impatience must bow in service to the larger story. Because if something is in your way, it is going your way. Because if something is in your way, it is going your way, the way of all beings, towards darkness, towards light. So I think this is really a very important thing for us to remember. You know, in Aikido, we call it blending, or musubi. Musubi in Japanese, musubi means a knot. How do you tie into your partner? How do you tie into your client? How do you tie into your loved ones? And whatever their point of view is, however exciting, harsh, loving, warm, rigid is, can you actually take a moment and blend with their reality? You're not saying it's your reality. It's not saying what you're going to do, but we'll take this moment to put ourselves aside, and to take on the reality that this person lives in, and take it on knowing that they, at some level, we share the same ground. And like all beings, as she says, she says, we're all going towards darkness or we're going towards light. And to be able to do this is not to capitulate to something, to over-merge with somebody, to take on something, but to actually authenticate the experience that others have. And while they're having them, we may not see the outcome of them for maybe 20 years, 30 years. We may not see the outcome of them for 600 years. For really a very, very long time. So as we finish here, are there any, I think that Mika wrote these down and she will send out these titles to you all. Thank you, Mika. Any last questions or comments or learning or observations? So I suggest I'm calling names. And if you're still on, please unmute yourself and we'll finish as we always do with a mood check. Let's remember that when we have a mood check, that we're really not just going, I'm making something up intellectually or conceptually. Let's see how much we can be informed by our body. I'm in a mood of gratefulness and commitment. Teresa.
Just feeling really humbled and in awe and of just something that is just so much bigger. It feels like being here with everyone. It's just, yeah, that's what I'm feeling.
Thank you. Mika.
My mood is just really one of absorption, just kind of taking it all in.
Thank you. Angie.
Compassion and relax.
Naya.
Thoughtful.
Mark.
Blessing, hope, and curiosity.
Alicia.
Trying to understand.
Savitha.
Open and like a sponge, a little, as if I absorbed a little too much.
Rochelle.
I feel bound up in areas I've never felt bound up really, because I think my awareness has deepened. So I would say a deepened awareness, but I need to do some unbounding.
Thank you. Claudia.
I am feeling grateful and full.
Lori. Lori, if you're there, would you unmute? Let's go to Jess then. You there, Jess?
Hey, yes. Feeling deeply resonant and connected as well.
Thank you. Ida.
Inspired and hopeful.
Matt.
Astronauts will tell you that we send the wrong people into space. You shouldn't send scientists, you should send poets.
Yes. Effie.
Resonance and excitement.
Kim.
I'm actually feeling just very emotional at the moment. Yeah.
Kareem.
I'm feeling pretty thoughtful myself, grounded, like I'm on the right path.
Kathy.
Inspired and recommitted.
And Tree. Are you with us, Tree? Okay. I think we have maybe a week or two that we are taking off. So I wish you all the best. So take it easy, but take it. See you. Hello.